Hey everyone, Digital Scriptorium here, and today I want to show off how to install Debian 13 Trixie step by step from start to finish. This video will be showing the installation with the default GNOME Desktop environment. However, I will have other guides on my channel showing off other desktop environments as well should you want something different. At the time of making this video, Debian 13 Trixie is in the release candidate phase. However, the official release will be coming out on August 9th, 2025. If you are viewing this video before the date, then you can feel free to take the plunge now and just do a software update to be on the official release version when it does come out, which is no big deal. This guide is intended as a general use case installation of the operating system. I'm going to show off system requirements, how to create the bootable media, how to install the operating system, and then a general tour of the operating system at the end. I won't be going into specific application usage as that is outside of the scope of my guide today. All the links I show off I will include in the description below so you can easily find them if need be. One disclaimer I just want to mention before I begin is this is a warning that this is an operating system install guide where I completely remove the previous operating system. As is with any operating system, you might run into unforeseen issues. So you have to go into this with an open mind that issues might spring up. Worst case, you can always attempt to install a different operating system back on. If you need help, I have many different Windows and Linux guides to accomplish this on my channel. Before I begin, I also just want to mention that if you are feeling generous, to think about donating to support my channel on either Ko-Fi or Patreon. Every bit goes right back into making new guides. Alright, with that all said, let's dive in. So first off, let's talk about minimum system requirements. So the minimum hardware requirements are pretty lean for Debian in general. The key thing to really look for is what you're really trying to get out of it. So for instance, if you're opting for the no desktop option, then minimum RAM is 256 megs of RAM, recommended is 512, and then 4 gigabytes of hard drive space. Whereas if you choose a desktop environment, then you want 1 gig of RAM, 2 gigs recommended, and then 10 gigs of hard drive space. As far as the processor goes, it basically says a Pentium 4 1 GHz system is minimum recommended for a desktop system. And then it also mentions as far as a server-based usage case that it's basically impossible to give a general memory or disk requirement because of what the server would potentially be used for. My general rule of thumb is if you can get by with at least a dual-core processor this day and age, that certainly helps. And then 2 gigs of RAM, definitely minimum. And then just whatever hard drive space you can throw at it, basically. Solid state drive, of course, will speed things up, so it'll be much peppier, but you can still get by with a mechanical hard drive these days on Debian. So at least at the time of making this video, Debian 13 is still just a release candidate. However, I want to show, if you watch this video on or after August 9th of 2025, then the way to download Debian 13 would be as follows. So on Debian's main website, if you click on the download link on the right-hand side, then it would immediately start downloading Debian 13 if it was actually released. I'll go ahead and click cancel for this right now. Now, if you're watching this video before August 9th and you want to download Debian 13, then you can follow these steps. So on the release candidate 2 download link, which I'll have in the description below, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, and then select the last option and just click on that and then just wait for this to download and then we will continue on. So next we need a utility that is going to work the magic in making a bootable USB thumb drive for us utilizing the ISO that we downloaded. This is where Rufus will come in handy. You could use other utilities such as Etcher or there's a few others out there, but however Rufus is the one that I prefer. As it's the simplest, it doesn't require having to be installed at all. It's a standalone executable that you just download and run. So to download Rufus, if we scroll down about a quarter of the way down the page, then you'll find the download section. Most users are going to choose this top one and then just find the latest and greatest version, which should be here, and that should get the job done. However, just to mention, there is also a 32-bit version, aka the x86 variant, and then you can also use the Windows on ARM variant if you wanted to at the bottom. There is the portable version, however, I have not found a use for that. So at least for the sake of this video, I'm downloading this top version. And it's only 2 megs, so it should download pretty fast. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to do open show on folder. I'm just going to minimize the downloads folder for right now. We can close out of the browser that you're using to download everything. We don't need that anymore. At this point, go ahead and plug in your USB thumb drive. I recommend at least a 4 gig thumb drive, if not larger. If you do not have a USB thumb drive on hand, I will have recommended inexpensive thumb drives listed in the description below that you could go with, and they will get the job done. So anyhow, I'm going to plug my USB thumb drive in, and then we will continue on. So I've got my USB thumb drive plugged in. Before we do continue on with Rufus at this point, I do want to go through one extra step, and that is that I've noticed with both Windows 10 and Windows 11 that Windows Defender is very iffy when in regards to Linux-based ISO images being built onto thumb drives. The problem is that it sees that it's operating system files, and it believes that they are malicious. This is a false positive that it's snagging those files and basically Pac-Manning them or eating them as they're trying to make their way onto the thumb drive. So what I found is that you will build up a thumb drive and either it will error part of the way through building the thumb drive, or you get to the point of actually installing it on the machine that you want to install it on, and then you start running into really weird errors, or it starts getting slow, or it starts freezing. So I'm going to show you the steps to temporarily turn off real-time protection for Windows Defender. This is not going to permanently damage it in any way. Like I said, this is just temporary. What's basically going to happen is we're going to turn it temporarily off, which buys us about roughly 15 minutes, or until the next time the machine gets rebooted, then Windows Defender will turn back on. So we do partially have to act kind of fast on this. However, we do have a good amount of buffer to get everything built up before Windows Defender were to turn back on. The steps I'm going to show are practically the same in both Windows 10 and Windows 11, so let's go through that now. So go down to the Start menu, and then type in Windows Security. And you should see Windows Security pop up. Let's click on that. Next up, click on Virus and Threat Protection. And then under Virus and Threat Protection Settings, click on Manage Settings. And then this is the section right here that we need to toggle off. So real-time protection, toggle the on to off. You're going to get the UAC prompt. Select yes for this. That's okay. And then we're going to get a little pop-up balloon on the bottom right-hand corner basically saying, hey, something's going on with Windows Defender, and it's just basically giving us a warning. That's perfectly fine. We can just click the X for that, and we can close out of this at this point. So next up, let's go to our downloads folder or wherever you stashed Rufus. So once again, make sure your USB thumb drive is already plugged in before you click on Rufus. So at this point, let's double click on Rufus, select yes for the UAC prompt. And then the first thing that we need to get through is we need to make sure that our thumb drive is actually being detected in the devices section. If your thumb drive is not showing up here, then I would recommend unplugging the thumb drive, give it a few seconds, plug it back in just to reseat it, see if it shows back up. If it doesn't, you can leave the USB thumb drive plugged in, reboot the machine, and then see if it shows up then. Worst case, if it still doesn't show up, then we can manually format it to see if it would maybe play nice for us. And if you do need to manually format it, all you have to do is go to this PC, find your thumb drive, highlight it, right-click on it, select Format, and then you can name it whatever you want. Just one thing also to mention is that when you go to format the thumb drive, it is going to nuke all of the data on it. So if there's anything you need to back up, please back it up before you continue this process. And then you would just click Start. If Quick Format is not checked, check it. And then you can just click Start. It'll warn you saying, hey, it's going to delete all the data that's on this thumb drive. You click Yes, as long as you backed up what you need. And then try to relaunch Rufus if need be. So I'm going to go back to the Downloads folder and with Rufus open. So in my case, my thumb drive is showing up on the top, so that's perfect. Next up, let's click on the Select button and then find where Debian 13 was downloaded to. And then once it's been located, in my case, it's just in the Downloads folder, so it made it nice and easy. And then we can click on Open. And then let's close out of everything that you might have open. I might big fan of making sure that there is absolutely nothing else running on the machine while we build up the thumb drive. Sometimes people web browse and stuff like that, or they might even fire up a game or some application, and there is always an off chance that it might corrupt some data as it attempts to build the bootable thumb drive. I leave everything as is for defaults, and we're leaving it all up to Rufus to work the magic. The key thing is, before we click on start, once again, this is just a warning that if there is any data on the thumb drive that you need to back up, please back it up now, as it will be formatted and wiped before it puts all the data on that we need for Debian. So just a warning. So we'll click on start. Rufus is mentioning this is an ISO hybrid image detected. We're going to leave it as the recommended option. Click on OK. And then it's popping up mentioning that it needs to download some files. And we're going to select yes for this. And again, it needs to download some files. Select yes once more. And then here's the warning that it's going to destroy the data on the thumb drive. So once again, make sure that you have everything you need off the thumb drive before continuing. In my case, I don't have anything, so I'll click on OK. And then at this point, just be patient as it works its magic, and then we will continue on. Now, if all goes well, then we should be seeing a green ready state. If an error pops up, then my recommendation is just try again. The other thing is that if it continues to error, then I would reboot the machine, make sure that Windows Defender is still turned off, once again, because it will automatically turn back on with a reboot. So just go through those steps that we did previously, and then try it again. If it's still erroring, it might be worth re-downloading the ISO. If it still errors, it might be worth trying a different USB thumb drive, so you have a few different options if it errors out. Anyhow, at this point, everything looks good, so I'm going to click on close. Next up is going to be the somewhat difficult part of the whole process, and that is getting the machine to actually boot off of the thumb drive. You do have a few options that you can choose. One way to do it is that you can Google your exact make and model of your machine, and then figure out which key you need to press in order to get the machine to actually boot off of the thumb drive. The other option is that if you're on Windows 10 or Windows 11, there is a method to get the machine to go into a recovery state, which would allow you to select the USB drive if you wanted to. So if you wanted to do the recovery option in Windows, all you have to do is go to Start, Settings, System, and then scroll down a little bit until you see the recovery section. You can click on recovery, and then you can have the option for advanced startup, in which case you can click on restart now, and then it will give you an option to select the USB thumb drive or whatnot. So that's one option. I'm just going to go ahead and reboot my machine, and I'm going to mash the special key for my machine, which at least in my case it's F12, but it could be the F2 key, the F4 key, F6, F8, F10, F12, the delete key. So a whole bunch of different options to choose from. Once again, just Google your exact make and model to figure out what the magical key would be, or use the Windows recovery option that I showed off. So anyhow, I'm going to reboot the machine, and then I will mash the special magical key to get us there. I'm going to start mashing the F12 key, at least for my machine. Not all Lenovo's are this key, but that at least is the magical key for mine. Now, not all machines are also going to display exactly the same as this one. However, if you see something along the lines of USB HDD or USB hard disk drive, or it might say USB virtual CD drive, or it might even say USB thumb drive. But basically locate that, in which case hopefully it actually shows up for you. And then with it highlighted, then just hit enter. And then we will wait for it all to load up here. I just want to show that the first screen does give some options. By default, it usually kicks off the graphical install. There is a basic install option that you can choose. There's advanced options. There's the accessible dark contrast installer menu. And then you could also install it with speech synthesis if you really wanted to. I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that we select the graphical install, at least for the sake of this video. We'll hit enter. And then just be patient as it loads up. A lot of the peppiness and how fast this loads is of course dependent on the hardware that you've got the USB thumb drive plugged into, and also how fast the USB thumb drive itself is. So once again, really comes down to which hardware is matched with which hardware. Anyhow, the very first page that will pop up is going to be your language selection screen. So choose the language that you need. In my case, I'm going to leave English, so that's fine. I'll click on continue. Next up is the select your location screen. So select your location, and then you can continue on. I'm just going to leave mine as the United States. That's fine. Click on continue. And then next up is going to be configure the keyboard. Once again, choose whichever keyboard you're utilizing. I'm going to leave mine as American English, and I will click continue. And then just be patient as it works. It's some magic at this point, and it's going to go through a series of different screens, but just be patient. At this point, one thing I do recommend, if possible, is plug your machine into a Ethernet cable if possible. The alternative is if you have a wireless controller in your machine that you could connect it to wireless to continue on. So once again, prioritize, if possible, plug it into Ethernet. If it's not possible, you can select wireless and you can go through the steps of connecting it to a wireless network. In my case, I do have wired Ethernet available, so I'm going to choose that and I'm going to click continue and then just be patient. And then next up is going to be the configure the network screen. Now this is the host name or computer name prompt that you will be asked to put something in. You can name this machine whatever you want. In my case, I'm just going to name it something generic. I'll just name it that and we'll click continue. And then next up, if you are connecting it to a domain, then you would be able to type in the domain name here. Most users are not going to have a domain, so you can just leave it as local domain and then click continue. Now this is optional. However, you could type in a password for the root account here, and that would enable the root account. Now, some people prefer to disable the root account for security reasons. If you decide to not utilize a root account, then you could leave these options blank, in which case when you go to create your user, then your user is given sudo capabilities, or basically administrative privileges. In my case, I am going to go ahead and create a root account, but once again, it's completely optional. So once again, if you want a root account, type in a password here. If you do not want a root account for security reasons, leave the two password fields blank and then click continue, and that will disable the root account. But anyhow, like I said, I'm just going to create a root account for the sake of this video, and then I'll click continue. And then next, it's going to ask for an actual user account to be created for non-administrative capabilities. Now, like I said, if the root account if you do not type in a password for the root account, then this user account that you create is actually going to have administrative capabilities. So go ahead and type in a name and then click on continue. And then generally it selects the first name that you type in. In my case, it says digital, and that's perfectly fine, but you can feel free to change it to whatever you want. I'll click on continue, and then it's going to ask you to set a password for this account. So make sure to type in something strong. And then if you did need to view the password, you could click show password in clear for both options. But in my case, I know that I should be fine, so I'll click on continue. Next up is going to be configure the clock. So go ahead and choose the time zone that works best for you. Eastern is perfectly fine for me. I'll click on continue and then just be patient as it continues on with the whole process here. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, the route that we're going with this video is actually installing just Debian on the machine. We're not doing a dual boot scenario. We are strictly making this just a Debian machine, and that is it. I do plan to create another video which will show how to set up dual booting between having Windows and Debian on the same exact machine. But anyhow, for this video, let's use the down arrow and let's go with the guided use entire disk option. There are also the options of setting up LVM and also encrypted with LVM. You can feel free to do research on the side if you feel as though LVM is right for you. And then there is also the option to choose a manual method, which is going to go through a series of steps where you have to manually set the partitions and the sizes and all that good stuff. But usually guided use entire disk works for most people. So we'll click on continue, and then you should see your drive listed of the machine. In my case, I have a 500 gig solid state drive. So that is already highlighted. Here is the thumb drive that I have plugged in. I'm not going to highlight that. We'll click on continue. I am going to leave all files in one partition recommended for new users. There's separate home partition, there's separate home, var, and temp partitions, and then there's even separate var and serve and srv swap for 1 gigabyte for servers. And then there's also the small disk, less than 10 gigabyte partitioning scheme. Like I said, we're just going to leave it as the recommended option. We'll click on continue. And then this is just a preview of what is going to be changed. So if everything looks good in this portion, which to me everything looks perfectly fine, then we will click on continue. Once again, also just to mention is that we are going to nuke all the data on the machine. So if there's anything you need to back up on the machine before you go through this process, then please do so and then go right through the steps that we did previously. Anyhow, I don't have any data that needs to be backed up, so I'll click on continue. And then here's the warning saying it's going to delete the data on the hard drive. Anyhow, I'm perfectly fine with that, so we'll select yes, click on continue, and then just wait for this to work its magic. And it will take a little bit of time, so just be patient. Next up is going to be configuring the package manager, and this is basically pointing us in the direction of what archive mirror do we want the operating system to choose to pull from. In my case, I'm going to just leave mine as United States. However, if you feel you need to change yours to any of the different ones, and feel free to, we'll click on continue. And then I'm just going to leave mine on deb.debian.org. That should do the trick. We'll click on continue. If you're behind a proxy, then you can feel free to change up your proxy configurations at this point. In my case, I am not behind a proxy, so I'll click continue and then just be patient again as it continues to work the magic. Next up is configuring the popularity contest, aka telemetry. So this basically is the opt-in, if you wanted to be able to send anonymous data back to distribution developers if you wanted to. I'm going to leave mine as no, but if you wanted to, you could change this to yes to, once again, give them telemetry data. Anyhow, I'll click on continue. So since this is the GNOME-based video, I'm going to leave both Debian desktop environment and GNOME checked, along with the standard system utilities. Now, one thing to mention is that anything you check here or don't check can always be changed after the fact. So this just makes it easy to build it now rather than just have to work a little bit of magic after the fact. Anyhow, if you are following one of my various server guides, then you may want to check the SSH server on. But if you're just using this as a general use machine of some kind, you don't need to have SSH available. So just throwing that out there. For the sake of my video, I'm just going to leave SSH off, but the steps of this video do not change if you toggle SSH on or off. It just comes enabled or disabled once everything is running. So anyhow, I'll leave that off for the sake of this video, but we'll click on continue. And then once again, just be patient. All right, if all goes well, we should see the finish the installation screen and installation is complete. If for some reason it errored out at this point, I would recommend just trying again. If it still errors out, then the other thing is, once again, was Windows Defender actually temporarily turned off and it potentially Pac-Manned the files as Rufus was working the magic. The other thing also is that it could also be that your USB thumb drive is just on the fritz, and it's always worth trying a different USB thumb drive. Sometimes different brand thumb drives can just act weird for some reason. Anyhow, go through kind of the steps that I'd mentioned and see if it makes a dent in the problem that you're seeing. But anyhow, in my case, mine installed okay. So I'm going to click on continue. And then what I'm going to do is, as soon as it goes back to my post screen, aka my Lenovo screen or whatever brand yours is, I'm going to pull the thumb drive. So I just pulled the thumb drive. That way it doesn't accidentally boot off of it again, and we'll hopefully have it booting off the main drive here shortly. And this is good. I'm just going to use the down arrow key just to stop the 10 seconds or so that we have before it just automatically continues on with the Debian GNU Linux. But there is the option for the advanced options for Debian GNU Linux. And then there's also the UEFI firmware settings that you could choose. Anyhow, I just wanted to show those off before it continued on. So I'm just going to hit enter to continue with just the default Debian GNU Linux at the top. And then just be patient as it loads up. The first time that it loads, it may be a little bit slower, but just give it some time and it should work the magic. And generally speaking, if you see any errors or anything on here, you generally don't have to be alarmed unless it's actually frozen and it's not actually getting anywhere. And at this case, we are now at the login screen. So I'm going to click on the user account that I created. I'll type in the password and then we will continue on. Then we should be greeted with the little take the tour option. If you want to take the tour, you certainly can, or you can skip it. One thing just to mention is that I will be showing off the general layout of the operating system anyhow. So if you want to still take the tour, feel free to. I'm just going to click skip for this. So just to mention that at this point, the operating system is loaded on. So technically speaking, you're good to go from here on out. If you're interested in seeing a general run through of kind of what GNOME looks like in Debian 13, then you can feel free to continue watching, and I'm just going to do a general overview of things. I'm not going to go into super fine detail on things, but it may be worth watching if this is all new to you. So anyhow, let's begin with that. So starting in the top right corner, you're going to see that you have 3 different icons. One is going to be your network icon, your volume icon, and the power icon. If we click on this, then it brings out this little breakout panel. So let's start on the top left of the little breakout panel. So if we click on this little icon that shows a camera and kind of a little selection area, click on that. And this is going to be your screen capture option. And it is pretty snazzy in the fact that it gives you a whole slew of options that you can use for screen capturing. So you've got the area selection option, which means that you can fine tune what area you actually want to crop out for the screenshot. There's the whole screen option, so you could have just this screen that we're viewing here could be the option. As you see here, it expands it out. And then if I had multiple apps open, then the window option would be available as well, in which case you can choose which app you might want to take the screenshot from. The other thing just to show is if you take a look on the bottom left, there's the take a screenshot option, and then there's a record screen option. And if you select record screen, it gives you the same exact options to choose for what you want to select. And then it also gives you the record button. And then if you're on the screenshot option, then it's just basically a capture once camera kind of option. So it's pretty snazzy. So we'll click X for that. And let's go back to the top right. So next over is going to be the gear icon. This is your system settings option. So we click on this, then this brings us right into the settings. I'll go into more detail into the settings option as that's kind of its own little topic, which I'll do in just a little bit. So we'll close out of this for right now and then go back to the top right. And then next over to the right is going to be the lock screen option. So if you click this, it locks the screen, but it keeps your applications open behind the scenes. So if you need to step away, but you want to make sure that your computer is secured, then you'd click the lock screen option. And then when you're ready to unlock it, then you can just left click or hit enter and then type in your password here. And then we'll hit enter to log back in. And then once again, top right hand corner. Next one over is going to be the power button option. So we click this. Then it's going to give suspend, restart, power off, or log out. So if you want to do any of those, then you can choose that option. And then if we just click at anywhere out of here, then it will bring us out without turning the machine off or any of those options that you saw. Below the top sections is going to be your volume slider. So this is of course going to change the volume on your machine. And then you can also click the volume icon to mute. Then click it again to unmute it. And then if you drag it all the way down, it will just mute also. Next up, if you have an Ethernet port on your machine, then it's going to give the wired connection option. You can click on the arrow and it's just going to basically mention what you could potentially do. For instance, I could disconnect my wired connection if I wanted to. And then there's a fast jump section for the wired settings if you wanted to adjust anything within that. If you have a wireless controller in your machine for wireless capabilities, then you do have the Wi-Fi option that will show up. If you click the arrow, it gives you options on what networks that are in your area to connect into. I will have this partially blurred out just for the privacy of my neighbors, but you can feel free to choose whatever you want for a wireless network. And then there's also the option for all networks, which just brings you into the settings page, which shows all available networks in the area to connect to. Next up is going to be the power mode option. So if you click the arrow, so by default, the power mode is set to balanced. Quite frankly, I always leave my machine set to balanced because it gives you best of all the power world, I guess you could say. So when the machine is not needing a huge amount of resources, then it kind of dips into the power saver mode. When it needs the resources, it kind of jumps into the performance mode. So it's best bang for the buck for performance in general. If for some reason you feel you just need maximum performance at all times, you can feel free to select the performance option. Just know that it's going to use a lot more power, which is probably going to produce more heat and all that good stuff, and more sound potentially from your system fans. And then the power saver option. Power saver option is really, in my eyes, meant for laptops. So if you're really trying to conserve power on your laptop, maybe as you're trying to get the maximum amount of battery power out of it, then you could choose the power saver mode. And then below that is going to be power settings, which just brings us right to the main settings page for power, which gives you a bunch of options, which we'll go over in a little bit. Next up is going to be the night light button. So this is just one of those things that you probably are used to with many different devices these days where it attempts to decrease the amount of blue light spectrum that is coming out of your screen. We can toggle that back on. The other option is that you do have a light and dark style option that you can choose. So you do have the option to choose between the different styles if you wanted to. And I believe if you also have a Bluetooth controller on your machine, then another section would show up, which would give you a Bluetooth option. And then the arrow you click on, and that basically goes through the steps of pairing devices and stuff like that to Bluetooth. Unfortunately, in my case, my machine does not have Bluetooth, but it's pretty straightforward in the selections that you can do in that. So that's it for the top right corner section. In the middle of the screen is going to be your date and time. So if we click on this, on the left-hand side is going to be your notifications pane. If there was a system update or an application update, or maybe you have emails set up on this machine, then it may also show kind of emails that have come in. Currently, since this is a fresh build, nothing is displaying in the notifications option. There's a do not disturb toggle that you could turn on, and then if you want to clear your notifications, you can click the clear button. And then on the right hand side is going to be your calendar, which you can feel free to toggle through different months, and then you could also go through years and all that good stuff. If you have any events set for specific days, then they will show up for the current day here. There's an option to add world clocks, and then you can also select a weather location if you wanted to as well. Pretty straightforward as far as that goes. And then in the top left corner, if you click this is going to kind of zoom us out to show the system tray in the bottom. And then it's also going to give you a search field in the top, and then as well as showing multiple desktops. Some people utilize the multiple desktops as having specific icons on it, or it could also be an area where you have specific applications open that you can hot toggle between multiple desktops without having to minimize your applications. So if you wanted to jump to the other desktop, you can just double click on the other desktop and it will zoom us into that one. And then if you wanted to jump to the other desktop, then you just click on the top left again, and then double click in. Now, if you also notice in the top left, the icon does change. So currently we're on the left desktop. Notice how on the right, there is a tiny little dot. If we double click over to the right desktop, then it states we are on the right desktop now. So we'll go back to the left one just to continue on. So I'll click that again just so we see the system tray. And just as I'd mentioned just a moment ago, there is the search option on the top. So if you wanted to search for a specific application like terminal, then you could type it here and then it's going to resolve to the specific name, ideally, that you're looking for the application. But we'll just click the delete button there. So on the bottom, you've got the system tray. So let's start furthest on the left and then we'll work our way through. So by default, Debian does ship with Firefox. So this is your default browser, which usually gets the job done for most people. You can, of course, feel free to change up the browser if you wanted to Chrome or Brave or some other browser of your choosing. But if you just want to leave just Firefox on here, we can click on this and it will load up Firefox for us. If you had any data from a previous browser, you could go through the steps of importing it. You can always do this after the fact as well. I'll just click Save and Continue. You can synchronize your devices if you wanted to Firefox. I'm just going to click on Skip this step. You can personalize Firefox with add-ons and all that good stuff if you wanted to by clicking this button. I'm just going to click on Skip this step, and then you can click on Start Browsing. And as I mentioned, Firefox for the most part would get the job done for most users. However, if you wanted to use Chrome or something else, feel free to change it up. You can download them after the fact. I'm not going to go into a deep dive on Firefox, but like I said, it's a general use browser, but we'll click out of it there. I go to the top left to show the system tray again. So the next option in the system tray is going to be Evolution. So if we click on this, now Evolution is an email client. So if you wanted to configure your email to be running in this, then you could go through the steps of getting this going. I'm not going to go through the steps of setting this all up, but feel free to jump into this if you wanted to go ahead and set everything up within it. But we can go ahead and click on Cancel, and we'll click the X to get out of this. And we'll bring back the system tray. So next over to the right is going to be Files. So what I'll do is I'll maximize this. So this is just showing you all the files on the machine. So if you're used to Windows, then this would be kind of your This PC option. So by default, it jumps us into Home. So this is the data that is specific to this user account that you're logged into. And then there's Recent Files. So if I'd opened any recent files, then they would show up within here. There's Starred or Favorited Files. They can show up in here. There's Network. So if you have devices on the network or servers on the network, then you can connect to them here. You can also manually connect to servers if you wanted to down below here. And then next up below that is going to be your trash. So if there was anything in your trash, then it would show here, and it would also give you the option to empty the trash. And then below that is documents. And one thing just to mention, if you notice, as I'm hovering over documents, it shows the exact file directory, the full file directory of documents. So it's showing Home, Digital, Documents. Just wanted to throw that out there. Next up is Music, and once again, it's going to show the full folder directory path, and then Pictures, Videos, and Downloads. That's pretty self-explanatory. We'll go back to the top left, and next up is going to be Software. So if we click on this, this opens up the little software store. So this is a handy area where you can hunt down different applications if you wanted to add to the machine, but this doesn't necessarily mean that you can't just go out to a website and download specific applications as well. This is just an easier area to where you can hunt down specific applications that might be showing up in the store here. And then there is the search option if you wanted to search for apps. There is the option to see your installed apps, which you can also uninstall if you wanted to. And then there's also the option for updates. So if there's any updates that are needed, then you would see them here. If you wanted to force a check of updates, you can click the little refresh icon and then give that a moment to load up. In this case, everything is already up to date. So pretty self-explanatory. Feel free to dive in, scope out some interesting software apps to download. So we'll pop open the tray again. Next up is going to be your text editor. So this is a good spot that you can just use as a scratch pad, and you can also create scripts or whatever you wanted to within this. Pretty self-explanatory again. Top left corner. And then next over is going to be your calculator. So again, everything you expect out of a calculator. In the top, you can also choose specific calculators if you wanted to as well. Close out of that. Top left corner to get the system tray again. Next up is going to be Help, which is the little lifesaver. And this is where you can feel free to go through the kind of knowledge base of options within the operating system if you wanted to. And then again, let's pop open the system tray. And then next up is going to be the Show Apps option, which is all these little dots. So this is going to show you every single application that is currently on the machine. And then there are also some grouped application sections like Utilities and Systems. And one thing to note is that this does come with LibreOffice installed as well. So you have options to the full LibreOffice suite, which is pretty snazzy. So anyhow, last but not least is going to be the Settings option. So let's jump into that and go through the paces of kind of the general settings that you do have available to you, and I'll go over a few things that you may want to change. So back to the top right corner, let's click on the gear icon again for settings. So in the top left, there is the little magnifying glass. So this allows you to actually search for settings if you wanted to, instead of trying to hunt and peck for a specific setting within here. But with that said, at the very top is the Wi-Fi setting section. So if you have a wireless controller in your machine, then you would see the option within here. So you can toggle on and off your Wi-Fi if you wanted to. You can connect to hidden networks. You can turn on Wi-Fi hotspots, and then it's also going to show your visible networks, which again, I will have this blurred out for the privacy of my neighbors. Next, below that is going to be network. So network, if you have an Ethernet controller of any kind on your machine, it's going to show options within this. You can toggle it off, toggle it back on. There's VPN options if you wanted, and there's also proxy options if you wanted to configure that. Below that is Bluetooth. So if I had a Bluetooth controller on my machine, it would give me options in here to potentially pair devices and whatnot. Below that is displays. So this is where you can change up the orientation of your screens if you wanted to. You can set the resolution. In my case, my resolution is actually set pretty low just to make it easier to view in this video. But you could feel free to change it up to like 1080 or something if it's not defaulting to that already. Generally speaking, it's usually pretty good about defaulting to the native resolution of your monitor, but if it's not, you can force it. It's also going to give you the refresh rate options, and then you can also adjust the scale, which sometimes you may want to set your scale to 150 or 125 just so it's easier to view, especially if you have a giant screen. And then there's the night light option, which once again, this just suppresses the blue color spectrum. And then below that is going to be sound. So once again, you can change up your volume. There's the input devices if you had any, such as a microphone, and then volume levels, alert sounds, stuff like that you can take a peek at. Below that's going to be power. So there's the power modes, which I went over previously. And then there's the power savings section. For instance, if you want to turn off the screen after a period of time, you can set the time it takes. There's also the automatic suspend. If you're running a desktop, a lot of users will want automatic suspend turned off so that you don't walk away and then come back and find that the machine is asleep. So you could toggle this off if you wanted to, if it's a desktop. It does warn you that it's of course going to eat up more power, but like I said, most desktop users turn this feature off, but it's also completely up to you. So I'll turn it off just because I am on a desktop. And we'll scroll down, and then the other option is in the general section talking about power button behavior. So it's basically just the option of what do you want the power button to do if you were to press it. Next up is multitasking. So this gives a whole bunch of different options to potentially make multitasking on multiple monitors or even a single monitor easier for you. Then below that is going to be appearance. So currently it's in the light mode. You can set it to the dark mode. And then you can also change accent colors. So for instance, I can set it to orange. And then if we scroll down, then you can add a picture if you wanted to, or you can set your desktop to one of the pre-canned desktops within here. We'll just change it to that one just to change it to something. And then below this is going to be apps. So you can search for your apps. There's the default apps that you can change up. One of the big ones might be if you downloaded a different browser, then you could change your browser within here. Same goes for mail and calendar and videos and photos and all that good stuff. And then at the bottom, if we scroll down, then there's removable media, for instance, media auto start if you wanted to. And then also there's the options of what you want, like a CD, a DVD, music player, photos, software, and other media types to do if they are plugged in or started. And then below that is notifications, so you can feel free to change up your notifications of the various apps. As you install more applications, you might find that more apps are actually showing up in the app notification option. Below that is going to be the search, so you can actually turn on and off specific applications or areas to be searchable on your machine. And then below that is online accounts, so this is if you wanted to connect an account, such as a Google account, Microsoft account, Microsoft Exchange, etc. Different options you can choose from. I'm just going to use the scroll bar here to scroll us down a little bit. If you're on a higher resolution, there may not even be a scroll bar, as it might be displaying all the options all on the screen as is. Anyhow, well, next up is going to be the sharing option. So this is going to be an option to where you can change your device name after the fact if you wanted to. There's the option to set up file sharing, and then there's also the option to set up media sharing if you wanted to. Below that's the well-being option. So this allows you to set screen time limits and things like that. There are break reminders and all that good stuff if you wanted to set that up. Below that is mouse and touchpad. So you can configure your mouse or touchpad however you want within this section. You can also change up if you wanted to use the left or right as the primary buttons on your mouse. And then below that is keyboard. So if you needed to add a specific type of keyboard or change what you actually set during the initial installation of Debian, you can do that here. Below that's going to be color management. So you could have color profiles available to you within here. Feel free to click on learn more if you want to dive into that a little bit more. And then below that's going to be printers. So if you wanted to add a printer, you would unlock and this would pop up asking you for your credentials, type it in, and then you can add a printer and then go through the steps of adding a printer. If you've already added a printer or multiple printers, then they will show up in here. Below that is accessibility. So if you need any of these accessibility options turned on or configured, feel free to dive into that. Next up is privacy and security. So if you need to adjust your screen lock, your location, file history and trash, cameras and device security, take a peek in here. And then finally is the system option. So the system option allows you to change your region and language, your date and time. You can add and remove users or change the password for specific users. There's the remote desktop option that you can turn on and off. And there's the secure shell or SSH option, which if you didn't turn it on in the installation process and you want to turn it on now, you can feel free to change it up here or you can remove it. There's also the About option. Now let's click in About real quick just to show you. Once again, this is another area where you can change your device's name, aka host name, if you wanted to, and then it gives you a general rundown of your machine. You can click System Details, which gives you more advanced details on what your machine is, if you wanted to. I'm going to click the back arrow to bring us back, and just to show you that there is the Software Updates section in here. So you can kick this off just as I'd shown earlier in the App Store. Once again, if you wanted to force it, you can click the refresh button. The alternative is to kick off this in Terminal if you wanted to. Anyhow, that's all up to date. So we'll click out of that. So really, that's all there is to Debian 13 using the GNOME Desktop. My recommendation is feel free to dive in. You know, the big thing about learning Linux, if you're not used to it, is you just gotta dive in. Don't be scared. Worst case, you botch something, feel free to look up if an error comes up, look it up on the forums or Google it or use ChatGPT or something to figure out what the issue might be. But the biggest thing for first-time Linux users, like I said, is just dive in. The key thing, do not be scared. Just go all in and see what magic you can make happen. So that's all you need to do to get Debian 13 Trixie running with GNOME Desktop. If you found this video to be useful, please like it and subscribe to my channel to keep up my latest video happenings. I also invite you to check out my channel if you haven't already, as it has many interesting guides and many more to come. Anyhow, until next time, take it easy.